When crimping a hydraulic hose, the first thing you want to look at is your hose drawing. Your hose drawing is going to give you the type of hose, in this case a 431 number 8. It's going to give you the length, 44.24 inches. It's also going to give you the fittings. In this case you have a straight fitting, a 10643, and a 45 degree fitting, a 13743. So once you have your fittings, you go to your fittings bin. You're going to pull out first your straight fitting, which is the 10643 number 8. You grab that fitting, make sure it's a straight. Then you're going to go grab your 45 degree fitting, the 13743 number 8. You're going to pull the fittings out, set them aside, and go into your caps drawer. You're going to grab a red cap that you're going to screw on to the end of the fitting. Then you grab your hose. Every hose tells you what type of hose it is on the hose itself. As you scroll down on this hose, you notice it says 431 number 8. So now you know you have the correct hose. Now you go to your hose table. Your hose table, you're going to have your circular saw that you cut. You're going to have your ruler and measure out the length of the hose. Making sure you have the proper length is important. So now you take your hose that you've grabbed, you mark out the length, in this case 44.24 inches. So you're going to put it at one end. You're going to make your little white line mark on the end of the hose so you know where to cut the hose on the saw. As you can see, I'm demonstrating, I'm marking my hose, making sure that my white line right there is visible so that when I turn on the saw, I can line that white line up with the blade of the saw and make a clean cut right through. So I'm getting the proper length. You must be very careful when cutting with the saw. There is a guard to prevent you from getting your fingers stuck in there. Now, each fitting you want to make sure that you are getting the fitting all the way on the hose. So hold the fitting up to the hose, and you see the white line that I created. I have a 1-inch depth that I have to create and get the hose onto. Now I take my oil, which is hard to see in this bin right here, but I have a bin full of oil that helps get the fitting to slide onto the hose much easier. I'm going to dip the fitting end into the oil. Coming up, you dip the fitting end in and you push the fitting all the way onto the hose until the end of the fitting lines up with the white line that you marked. As you can see, I've got that white line marked right at the end of the hose. Now I got to apply the 45 degree fitting, so I'm going to do the same steps. I'm going to hold the fitting up to the hose, and then I'm going to make my white mark so I know how far I have to put the fitting on the hose to make sure that it's completely on the hose. For safety reasons, if your hose is not all the way on, or the fitting is not all the way on the hose, you run the risk of the hose end blowing off, and which can result in death for somebody. Now you go to your chart here. Now that you've got your fittings on, you're going to look at your crimp chart. You know that you're using a 431 number 8 hose, and this chart will tell you what your crimp spec is. In this case, my crimp spec has got to be between a 945 and a 965. So I usually crimp around 955. Now I go over to my crimp machine. We have a fin power machine. You're going to press the green button to turn the machine on. Once the machine is on, you're going to notice some numbers up there. The first number that I'm pointing at is your crimp spec. In our case, we need to set it at 0.955. The second number, the 32-19, that is the crimp diagram that we need to set in the machine so that the crimper will crimp down to the 0.955. The third number that I pointed to, that is how wide your teeth will open up on your crimper so that you can get the fitting to fit within the crimp die. You push the enter button and you turn the knob so you can set the crimper to the proper crimp spec, which in this case is 0.955. Once you do that, you look at what crimp die you need to use for the diagram so that the crimper will crimp down to the proper crimp spec. In this case, you're going to crimp it down to the 32-22. Once you've established all that, you're going to put your hose into the crimp machine. You're going to press the crimp button and the hose crimper is going to crimp down onto the hose. You can notice my white line is still right there, and the hose fitting has been crimped down all the way onto the hose. eliminating that gap, and I'll show you that gap in a second. When you put the fitting on, you see a gap between the hose and the fitting. Once the fitting goes into the crimper and you hit the button for the crimper to crimp down on the hose, when it comes out, that gap is eliminated. If you have a gap in there, the hose did not crimp down properly. You cannot have a gap. For safety reasons, gaps are not good. Now that you've successfully crimped both ends of the hose and made sure that there is no gap, looking over the hose for no cracks in the fitting, you can lay your hose out on a table and you see you have a completed hose assembly with a straight end on one side, a 45-degree hose end on the other side, and a 44.24-inch hose. You have successfully completed one hydraulic hose crimp.